What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live, brought to you by Sticks.com. I am your host, Emma Lingen. I'm joined tonight by Michael Trakos here on night 2 of round 1 of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. So we are coming at you live to discuss our real, live, raw reactions to Game 1 of the Battle of Ontario between the Senators and the Maple Leafs. A rather one-sided battle, but we will get to that momentarily. We've also got game 1 between Minnesota and Vegas coming up here in a few minutes. We will be sure to let you know what's going on. We'll give you live updates from there throughout the show tonight. But before we do get into all of that, do want to remind you that we are brought to you by Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's STIX.com. Head there now and gear up. All right, Michael, Battle of Ontario. We're going to get to it in a second. But first, we are going to just recap what else happened today. Before Leafs Sens, we had Carolina and New Jersey. So the Hurricanes took game 1 from the Devils by a final score of 4-1. Logan Stankoven scored 2 goals for Carolina. New Jersey lost a couple players, Cody Glass and Brendan Dillon, to injuries. So just quick thoughts on that one, Michael, on early going here in game 1 for these two teams.
Yeah, I think a lot of us were predicting a pretty short series here, Emma. I don't think anyone is really picking the Devils because they're missing, Jack Hughes, and they just don't seem like the same team that entered the year with so many high expectations. And now you mentioned a couple more injuries, so not looking too good for the Devils. Obviously, Carolina overwhelmed them completely. Logan Stankoven, the big acquisition at the deadline, he comes over from Dallas in the Mikko Rantanen trade. He's basically playing like the guy that Carolina thought they had in Rantanen. So huge game for Carolina. I predicted a sweep. I think so did my colleagues Ryan Kennedy and Steve Warren, or at very least a quick series. So, one down, probably 3 more to go for Carolina.
Yeah, I think I had a little bit more faith in the Devils. I mean, I still think Carolina was going to win the series, but I was thinking Canes in 5. But we'll see. After game 1, it could be Canes in 4, like you said. However, we are going to move on to tonight's big game between the Leafs and the Senators. Again, to anyone who is joining us, we are live. So wherever you are joining us from, YouTube, X, TikTok, all of the places that we are right now, feel free to send us your questions, and we would love to try and answer them. Questions, comments, concerns, thoughts and feelings and hopes and dreams about this series. We would love to hear them. So please send them our way. But let's get into it. So, like I said earlier, pretty one-sided battle between the Leafs and the Sens tonight in game 1, despite the fact that Ottawa did sweep the regular season series. So I think people expected, at least, well, I shouldn't say people, I expected this to be not as quite of a one-sided series. And again, it has only been one game. But how much, if you were expecting maybe a tighter series, a closer series, how much, Michael, did game 1 and the outcome there, really kind of sway your prediction for how this series is going to go?
Well, Ottawa's been waiting 7 long years for this moment, Emma, and they look like a team that has been out of the playoffs for 7 years. Like, they just looked completely disjointed. Tried to play a physical game, ended up taking too many penalties, and the Leafs made them pay. Linus Ullmark looked like the Linus Ullmark from your colleague or co-host Michael Ojello's time with the Buffalo Sabres. That he had one of his worst games, I think, in an Ottawa Senator uniform. And really, Toronto's top guys performed. Ottawa's top guys didn't. Just top to bottom, it just wasn't the game that Ottawa was hoping to play. I was expecting a physical game. I think Ottawa brought that physicality, but like I mentioned, it just too many times went over the line. And, Toronto's power play has been, I think, the number 1 power play since the trade deadline. We saw it tonight. Goals from Nylander, goals from Matthew Nyes, goals from John Tavares, and then Mitch Marner adding another goal on the even strength. So, this was everything that the Toronto Maple Leafs needed to do in game one, which was fend off the physicality of the Ottawa Senators and let their top dogs, go to town. And here we are. Strong game from Stolars, weak game from Allmark, and it's 1-0 for Toronto right now.
Well, you mentioned those top dogs, and I think we need to talk about that a little bit more because this has been something, it's been the bee in the Leafs bonnet forever now, right? Is that their top guys don't show up in the playoffs. Sometimes they literally don't show up. Like, was it last year that
Yeah.
Nylander was dealing with the migraines? Yeah. So, for one reason or another, these guys don't show up. Now, again, only been one game. But if we're looking at the big four of Marner, Nylander, Tavares, and Matthews, three of those four scored goals. You mentioned Marner scored twice. Matthews had an assist on Marner's first goal. Again, one game, but how good of a sign is this for the Leafs that maybe, for once, all of these guys are healthy and they're all starting to click at the same time in the postseason for this team?
Yeah, that's been the rub against the Leafs, like you mentioned last year. Well, there was Nylander was out with a concussion or migraines, and Matthews had a concussion, and then Mitch Marner just went missing. Like he was on the ice, but you couldn't find him. So, there's a lot of people in Toronto, not just from last year, but over the years, just been wondering when is this collection of skill and talent and a lot of money, when are they actually going to start showing up? And obviously it's a big year for Mitch Marner because he's a pending UFA. Same thing with John Tavares and even Matthew Nyes. He doesn't have the same baggage that those other guys have, but another guy who's going into the summer as an RFA. So, there's a lot of pressure on these guys, obviously. And then game one, they all answered the bell. Marner with a huge breakaway goal kind of opened up the game. But, we saw it from everyone, including Morgan Riley, who also chipped in with a goal from the back end. So, this is exactly what the Leafs needed. They needed a feel good game. And then right down to the goaltending, like Anthony Stolars, he faced a ton of shots in that first period. It could have been easily a 3-1, Sens leading after first period. And, even in the second, like Brady Tkachuk gets a breakaway, doesn't score. And it seemed like every time Ottawa did put the puck in the back of the net, Toronto had an answer. So, like I said, this was exactly the kind of, statement game that Toronto needed to send. Their power play is something that last year really sunk them against the Bruins. I think they had more power play goals tonight than they had in the entire first round against Boston last year. So, this is one of those confidence boosting games for the Leafs. And for the Sens, I don't know what they do now because, they tried to play the kind of game that, Florida Panthers have played against the Leafs and even the Boston Bruins have played against the Leafs, which is, you know, make it uncomfortable for their top guys, take away a lot of the space on the ice. And what we saw tonight is too many of their guys just, flirted with that edge and went over the edge too many times.
Well, we've talked a lot about the Leafs, and now, like you said, we're going to talk a little bit about the Senators here. Lots to critique about this team in this game, and we will get even more into the goaltending. Definitely, I think we saw Sabres Olmark and not Bruins Olmark in this game, unfortunately for Ottawa. So, do want to talk specifically though about the self-inflicted wounds that they had, especially in the second period. They had, that led directly to back-to-back power play goals for Toronto. Obviously, Toronto has a really good, obviously, power play unit, but looking at this matchup and the way that game one went, how much do you think that special teams and or just the inability to stay out of the penalty box could end up being Ottawa's ultimate undoing in this series against Toronto?
Yeah, you know what? If you take away the power play opportunities, Emma, I think this was an even match. And I think that's really where things started to change is that every time, in that second period, I don't know how many penalties they took, but I'm looking here on the score sheet, 8 penalties total for the Ottawa Senators. That's probably 6 or 7 too many. Like if the Ottawa Senators hope to have a chance against the Leafs, they have to stay out of the box. I'm sorry. It's just, Toronto's power play right now is 5 forwards, and every one of those forwards would probably be one of Ottawa's top guys on the power play. So you're just you're playing with fire, and we saw it tonight. Like Toronto just has too many options. So, Ridley Gregg has to kind of go back and do some soul searching here because his game was just too erratic. There was that cross-checking penalty that he took. Was that on John Tavares? That very could have easily been a 5-minute major. The Ottawa Senators are lucky that it was only 2 minutes. And I don't know if you want to talk more about that. Like, how did you feel that one went? Because Tavares goes in for a check, and Greg gets his stick up and nearly takes Tavares's teeth out with that one.
Yeah, that was a weird one. It was a tough one just because of the angle and like I don't know that again, I think it was right for them to call it a 5-minute major and because then that gives you the opportunity to review it and then downgrade
Point.
if necessary. I will say I have seen a lot of plays like that that probably should have gotten the 5-minute call and didn't. So I would say that in the first place is probably, it was the right call, but I don't know. I think that it was hard to see if he really made contact with his head. But either way, it's a scary play. It's a dangerous play. I do think though, and this could lead to, a deeper conversation here. And again, if you are joining us here, we are live, the playoff frenzy live here at the Hockey News. Emma Lingen, Michael Tracos talking about Leafs versus Senators. And this, I feel, should be something that will get a lot of people chiming in the comments section. And we would love to hear your comments and your questions about this. Michael, your thoughts on the officiating in tonight's game? We mentioned that the game itself seemed rather one-sided, but what are your thoughts on the officiating?
If you're an Ottawa Senators fan, you might think it was one-sided as well. Obviously, there were some calls, and I was on Twitter, and one of our Ottawa Senators site editor, Steve Warren, was taking offense to some of the so-called diving that was going on by Toronto players, like the Gaudette cross-checking penalty that happens basically a minute after a similar cross-checking penalty on Greg. Gaudette pushes Matthews from behind, and Matthews is a big guy. Okay, it's not like you're pushing down someone who's like 5'10", 160 pounds. Like Matthews is one of the bigger guys on the ice, and feels the push on the back of his jersey and goes down, and that puts Toronto up 2 men. And I'm sorry, as good as Toronto's power play is, you don't want to make it even easier on them and give them a 5-on-3 penalty. So I'm sure Travis Green is going to be talking about, how lopsided the officiating was in this game. But I think, rather than look at the guys in stripes, he's got to be looking at his own players. Like they cannot play this way. I think the Ottawa Senators are, top 5 team for body checks, and they play a heavy style of hockey. That's fine, but you cannot be going and making a steady stream to the penalty box. It's just not going to work out in their favor. So, either two things are going to happen. Ottawa's going to clean up their game, or the referees are going to put away the whistles. But based on tonight, I don't see the latter happening. I think this is going to be the standard that we see through games 2 through however long it goes.
Yeah, like you said, a lot of the plays by Ottawa, the really physical plays, some of them just really didn't seem like hockey plays. They look like plays of desperation, like guys
Right.
that are kind of frantic and scrambling because they're down by 2, 3, 4 goals. And like you said, guys who haven't been in the playoffs in 7 years, and it shows. And like you said, got a little erratic. If you're a guy like Ridley Gregg, great, you scored a goal, but in a 6-2 game, then that's not really going to make up for all of the penalty minutes that you also racked up during this game. So I think that I agree with you. I understand there was a lot of, that's why I just wanted to make sure we addressed it, because I know that a lot of people were talking about the officiating in the game. So wanted to make sure that we mentioned that. But you know what? Another big storyline from this game, and you alluded to it earlier, Michael, is the goaltending. So let's start first with Anthony Stolar. So he was huge for this team tonight. He, in the first period alone, the Senators outshot the Leafs 13-5, and he kept them in the game. Have the Leafs finally found a goaltender that they can actually ride into a deep playoff run, and at a $2.5 million bargain, no less? I mean, it's almost like you can't make this stuff up, right? Where it's like you go out and get, the superstar goaltender like the Linus Ullmark, for example. We'll get to him in a minute, but that doesn't pan out. And instead you get backup Anthony Stolars, who is now becoming your main guy and looking like he deserves to be there.
Yeah, and it was his first, I believe, it was his first ever like career playoff start in net. Like this has been a journeyman who has bided his time. Obviously, he wins a cup with the Florida Panthers, but only came in once during last year's playoffs in spot duty. And this year he and Joseph Wall split the net. Wall actually had more starts than Anthony Stolars, but in the last couple weeks, it was clear that Stolars was the guy for the Leafs. Like he's been just red hot. I think he had like 2 or 3 shutouts down the stretch and not allowing many goals. And he's as hot as any goalie in the NHL. I think he finished with the best save percentage in the NHL, and he was like top 3 in goals against average. So for a backup goalie who isn't making a whole lot of money, he's just been everything that Toronto has been needed. And let's be honest, even if he does have a bad game or goes on a cold snap here, Emma, the Leafs still have Joseph Wall, who many people, myself included, like 2 weeks ago, I would have said Joseph Wall gets the start for game 1. That's how good he's been as well. So kind of an embarrassment of riches for the Leafs. And then on the other end, Linus Ullmark, I think a lot of Ottawa Senators fans were saying to themselves, well, he hasn't been as good as advertised for the regular season, but that's okay. We didn't get him for the regular season. We got him, get us into the playoffs, but mostly in the playoffs, this is a guy that's going to be earning his money. So, a terrible night for him. Obviously, 6 goals on 24 shots, just not good enough. That's clear. At the same time, I do feel for him. Toronto Maple Leafs have that power play and you go give them that many opportunities. It's not really on the goaltender, but I don't know about you. Were you kind of surprised because one of our colleagues here, Ken Campbell, I think in the first period, first or early in the second, was asking the question like, should the Ottawa Senators pull Allmark if nothing more than just to kind of give them a fresh start? And were you kind of thinking that maybe we were going to see an Anton Forsberg at some point?
I don't know that I was expecting him to be pulled in game 1. I just think so much of that was, and again, that's not to say that you only pull the goalie when the goalie himself is having a bad night, but I just
Right.
think so much of it was, like I said earlier, self-inflicted wounds, penalties by the Senators and by the guys playing in front of him. He is so interesting to me, Allmark, as a goalie. He's one of those guys that I just can't really figure out, because, he's a Vezina winner, and then he'll, go in the playoffs. I think he's now allowed 4 goals or more in 6 of his last 10 playoff starts. So he is not known for being a playoff guy. And it's, with goaltenders, it is kind of a conundrum, because he was, like you said, during the regular season, not quite the elite, Vezina caliber goalie that we were hoping for. But honestly, down the stretch, like since the Four Nations break, he kind of was. I mean,
Yeah.
he was a big part of getting them into not well, they were already in the race, but kind of keeping them in the race and lifting them into that wild card spot. So for someone who has been so hot and cold just during the regular season alone, it does concern me a little bit that he comes now and, is not looking great in game one. Do we see him in game two? I honestly don't know. Michael, we got a question
I
here.
think he's going to be there in game two. Like, here's the thing with Ottawa. Like, Toronto doesn't need their goaltenders, I think, to stand on their head. I think with the Senators, if they're going to win the series, Allmark's going to have to steal possibly 2 games here. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And so I think we know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask you anyway. We got this question from a viewer, Stolar's game two.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh
I know
yeah.
Ryan Kennedy actually was saying, could the Leafs do a Stolar's game one, Wall game two, and then just kind of almost literally a tandem situation for the first round? I don't think that's going to happen. Like, knowing Craig Berube, knowing every coach, like, they don't like fiddling with their goaltenders. It's kind of like win and you're in, lose and maybe we'll talk. So I don't know how, unless Stolar's is banged up from, I think it was Brady Kachuk almost like took out his knee on that one scrum in front of the net. And I think another player, whether it was Cousins or Greg, slammed into him later on in the game. I think it was Greg. So maybe that would be the only concern, is how is his health? But, if he's feeling good, 100% he's in game two.
I mean, if like you said, as long as he's healthy, if you look at just his performance in game one, you can't justify taking him out for game
No
two.
way.
I think just even the way he moves and the way he absorbs pucks for a guy as big as he is, the way he moves laterally, like I was so impressed. I mean, I cover the Nashville Predators. I'm used to covering small, fun-sized UC
That's right.
Saros, who is really good at the lateral movement because he has to be because he doesn't cover up the net, and he is very, very good at that. But it's amazing to me to see someone of Stolar's size still moving the same way, just absorbing the pucks. He wasn't getting a lot of rebounds. I mean, he was incredible. And like you said, the Leafs didn't need a goaltender to stand on his head, but he kind of did for them in that first period, especially.
Yeah, there
Um,
was that breakaway on Brady Kachuk. With that could have
yep.
easily been a 2-2 game, and then shortly after, I think Dylan Cousins or might have been Bathurst. I think it was, some. I think, oh no, Shane Pinto. I think from the left side. Similar to what you just said, where there wasn't any holes. Like, it was just like Pinto takes the shot, and it was like, well, Stolarz is there, swallowing pucks, not making it look flashy, just kind
Yeah.
of positionally sound.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we talked about Toronto's power play a little bit already, but just kind of want to, get a little bit deeper into this. They were a measly 4.8% last year against Boston in the playoffs. Now they're already 3 for 6 in game one. Now, again, says a little bit more about the Senators game that they even had 6 power play chances in the first game, but again, converted on 3 of them. So, how much of this game or this series rather, do you think is going to be decided by special teams?
It's a good question, and I think that's really going to be up to Ottawa. They can't take this many penalties, like I've said it already. And if they are, Toronto now has the confidence that they didn't have a year ago, and it seems silly that even a year ago their power play wasn't clicking like it is right now, because it was the same personnel. It's not like anything's really changed. You still had Matthews, who last year had 69 goals. Still had Nylander, who's a 40-goal scorer. You got Marner, who's arguably one of the better passers in the NHL. Tavares is just so good this year. I don't think enough people are talking about what a season he's had, and very very closely came to scoring 40 goals as well. And now you've got a big body in Matthew Nyes who's in front of the net. So 100%, Ottawa cannot keep going to the penalty box, because the Leafs are just going to make you pay. And it's one of those things where, had their power play even clicked at like a 15% rate last year, Emma, the Toronto Maple Leafs might have beaten Boston And if they, if their power play stays that way, then, this is a team that I don't know who can stop them. It's just the fact that as much talent as they've had, this is sort of new territory. Like they don't tend to score power play goals in the postseason, which is just kind of vexing for this team. So, off to a great start, that's for sure.
Definitely. Well, you mentioned the Leafs have the confidence now that they didn't maybe have last year. Uh, the Leafs often also get kind of a bad rap for having a bad arena environment, not even just during playoffs, regular season as well. But the building was buzzing. It certainly seemed to be on TV anyway, but it sounded, you could hear on the broadcast the Brady sucks chants,
That's right.
coming towards Brady Kachuk. And we're gonna get to Brady Kachuk in a second because we got a listener or a viewer question about him. But first, how much do you think the crowd and the atmosphere there is in Toronto is going to add to the Leafs' home ice advantage here in this series?
Yeah, it's a different crowd in the playoffs than it is in the regular season, that's for sure. And let's not forget, it is Easter Sunday, so it wasn't a typical weeknight kind of crowd. This was a weekend crowd where, you know, enough people were able to kind of shed their suits and put on jerseys and cheer. Strangely enough, there was, if you followed on Twitter, and there was a fire in the 300 level during the first period of the game as well. So the Leafs were on fire. Okay, I'm going to make that kind of bad joke here, but things were cooking for them. You know, the, no, Toronto's never going to be Winnipeg or Nashville. I might add, like Emma, like I was there for Nashville's Stanley Cup final appearance, and one of my favorite road arenas. Just when you're talking about Leaf fans chanting Brady sucks. Well, going to Nashville after a home goal and the way that they ride the visiting goalie is like no one else does that. I almost feel sorry for the poor guy. Like it's all your fault. They start
Yep.
chanting that, and I just love it. But good on Toronto for being loud. I think I heard some Allmark kind of jeers as well, so they were loud. And you want to get to Brady Kachuk. Although I got to add, maybe don't wake that sleeping bear, because it didn't seem like he had his big game for the Ottawa Senators. So I wouldn't be wanting to kind of get under his skin just yet, because I imagine we're going to see a better version of him in game 2.
Well, on that note, I'll follow up here with another viewer question that we got earlier in the show. Do we think that Brady Kachuk did enough in this game for Ottawa? I mean, obviously couldn't single-handedly win a game for him, but do you think that he, with all of you get that much attention and that much of, the Brady sucks, all of that, it's because you're either doing something really well or doing something really poorly. So I think that, do you think that he showed up for the Sens in this game the way that, he's kind of expected to?
Just simply off the stats, no. He didn't get a goal. He didn't get an assist. So, I think if the Ottawa Senators are going to, challenge the Leafs and at least make this a series, obviously Brady Kachuk's going to have to be a huge factor. That being said, if he scores on a breakaway, we're maybe talking about a different kind of experience with Brady Kachuk. Gets 5 shots. He had 7 hits. So it's not like he was invisible on the ice. But again, when you're talking about the Ottawa Senators and, the straw that's kind of stirs the drink, the guy that drags him into the fight, it is Brady Kachuk. And I wonder if he wasn't going to score or get an assist tonight, I'm kind of surprised maybe he didn't drop the gloves. Like I was really expecting a fight tonight, Emma. Like maybe it's just a matter of no one wants to fight Kachuk, because I don't blame him. I wouldn't want to fight the guy. The only guy maybe in Toronto that could handle Kachuk would be a Ryan Reeves, who wasn't in the lineup tonight. But we're going to be talking about Kachuk probably guaranteed game 2 onward.
Yeah, I was a little surprised too. I thought for sure with all that physicality, all those penalties, all of the whistles, I thought for sure we would see at least one fight tonight. I mean, when you've got Tkachuk and you've got Nick Cousins on the same team, it's like, come on, it's going to happen. But it didn't happen. So, like you said, Brady Tkachuk, not invisible for this team, but could certainly stand to use a bounce back game in game 2. Anyone else for you really on either team who you think is going to need a big bounce back in the next game?
Well, obviously, Allmark is the obvious one. The other one is, Jake Sanderson. He was in a lot of people's top 5 Norris candidates when we're doing voting. He's a guy that had a great, 4 nations as well. I think if the Ottawa Senators are going to have any hope of keeping Toronto's stars off the score sheet, Jake Sanderson is going to have a huge role in that, and same thing with a Thomas Chabot. So, again, it wasn't huge games from them. I'm looking at the stats actually. Jake Sanderson still managed to finish the game +1. So again, it kind of highlights the fact that you take Toronto off the power play, and this was a game that Ottawa felt comfortable playing. It's just the special teams kind of really killed them. But I'm expecting a bounce back from Allmark, bounce back from maybe not so much Sanderson, but Dylan Cousins is another guy that, when we're talking about Brady Tkachuk and the physical game that he plays and how he can be sort of a catalyst, well, Dylan Cousins is, again, that kind of player as well. And he had 5 hits. He had 2 shots, ended up getting an assist. But, it's going to be him and Tkachuk really kind of leading the physical charge.
All right. Well, before we do our wrap up and our look around the league, I believe we are going to be joined by Ryan Kennedy, who is at the game or post game, I guess, for Leafs versus Senators right now. So, hoping that we can get him in here. Oh, there he is.
Hello.
Hello,
How's it going?
Ryan. Welcome. All right, give it you're fresh out of the room. Were you in the Leafs room or the Sens room tonight?
I was in the Leafs room, and then I was for Travis Green's availability. They did podiums, so got Ottawa's Travis Green, and then the Leafs also brought Mitch Marner and Oliver Ekman-Larsson to the podiums as well. So a bit of both, mostly Leafs.
All right. So what are your immediate impressions after listening to everyone post game?
It was interesting because coming into this series, I thought Ottawa's big problem would be they're a young, excited team. They can be very aggressive. Would they get into penalty trouble, and would the Leafs make them pay? That's exactly what happened. And Travis Green said something very interesting. He said, there were a few calls there that the Leafs, sold very well. I thought for the most part, it was a lot
Michael,
of cross
you called
checks.
it.
Yeah,
Michael, you called it. He said Travis Green was probably going to say something about that.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, but it was like boardings, cross checks. Like I don't, if you get hit in the back, you're probably going to fall over. But you know what? I mean, he's got to defend his boys. I thought that Travis Green also said he thought he was very happy with the Sens 5-on-5 play. And, he was saying, if you look at, he's like, I haven't seen the analytics, but I bet we did pretty well 5-on-5. I would agree with him there. I thought Ottawa definitely, especially in the first half of the game, looked like the better team 5-on-5. The problem was the discipline wasn't there for them, and Toronto's power play was just lethal, and it was basically game over, especially with the way Allmark was playing.
Ryan, you expect the Allmark to get the game 2 start, and are you expecting him to bounce back, or is this just a matter of Toronto's just got so much skill?
It's going to be tough. I mean, I think you have to go with Allmark. He's your guy. And again, Travis Green, our own Ken Campbell asked Travis Green after the game, he was like, hey, the elephant in the room here was Allmark's play. Green claimed there was no elephant. But I think anybody who watched the game saw that Allmark, he struggled, right? There were some good shots, but they were just wrist shots. But I think you have to go with him. Travis Green says he likes their goaltending. But I do worry that, the core four, They got a taste of it tonight, and that's the big, trouble for Ottawa is if Toronto's big guns keep rolling, it's going to be very difficult to keep them off the scoreboard and win this series.
All right. Well, Ryan, we really appreciate you hopping on to join us live tonight, live and in person. Thank you so much for that insight from those post-game interviews and really good stuff there. And we're looking forward to seeing you on future episodes here at Playoff Frenzy Live.
Indeed. Thanks for having me.
All right. We are going to wrap up tonight's conversation. Again, just looking around the rest of the league, we've got, again, Vegas Golden Knights and Minnesota Wild playing right now. They are a little over halfway through the first period, still 0-0 there. Michael, we got this question earlier from a viewer. How are you feeling about the Wild in this series? Because earlier when we talked about Carolina and New Jersey being a quick series, I said, I think that Minnesota Vegas might be quicker. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are there.
Nothing against the Wild. I just think Vegas is such a juggernaut, Emma. Like, I don't see any weaknesses there. I see them basically having sort of a cakewalk. I think they'll get past the Wild in, no more than 5 games, and then they'll take whoever wins the LA Edmonton series. And I think it's going to be a Vegas Colorado Western Conference final. That's the way I kind of see it. But Wild, maybe they'll make this interesting. And if they do, it's going to be because of Kaprizov. He's been red hot since he came back, and Joel Eriksson Ek as well. Huge addition, but it just, from the goaltending, from the defense to, Jack Eichel's just been so great this year. I really don't see Vegas having any trouble with Minnesota.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. But you never know. Crazy things happen in the playoffs, so you really never know.
First round is such chaos, right?
Yes, chaos indeed. We've got 2 series that are kicking off tomorrow, Monday. We've got Washington, Montreal starting, and Edmonton, LA, which you mentioned. Those 2 series kick off tomorrow. Plus, we've also got game 2s tomorrow for Dallas, Colorado, and St. Louis and Winnipeg. So busy night, tons of action tomorrow night, and want to take that as an opportunity to remind you all that we are here live every night during the playoffs for Playoff Frenzy Live here at the Hockey News. And so we're going to be breaking down all the action with our live results, live raw reactions, and feel free, please tune in, send us your questions, send us your comments. As I said, your thoughts, prayers, hopes, dreams, whatever you're feeling during these playoffs, we are here to feel it with you. Michael, want to wrap up tonight. Want to say thank you again for joining me tonight. And my name is Emma Lingen. Again, we are here every night during the playoffs. We look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow.